Hey everyone, Dan here. We are just after market close on Tuesday, July 27th. Today we're going to take our daily look at SoFi. Before we get into it, if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe button. It helps a lot. And also keep in mind, these are my own thoughts, opinions, and ideas. These are not intended to be, nor should you take them as investment or trading advice in any way, shape, or form. Do your own due diligence, put the work in for yourself, and come to your own conclusions and take actions based on those. All right, so I am back home today, FYI. We had a little travel, as you know, so the videos started to get challenging as of yesterday. If you didn't notice, they got sort of progressively more challenging, which isn't what I would have anticipated, but they did. I'm glad to be home, and we can sort of settle back into the routine, so I'm happy for that. Now, in a weird way, I'm also happy with how SoFi acted today, and I'll kind of walk through why and why this still isn't in any way kind of shaking me loose from my price targets that I have, which at this point feel very high, but to my mind, that $50 price target in 2022 is just looking like more and more potential upside as I see it. And like I've said in previous videos, but if you haven't caught those or if you need a reminder, those longer term price targets, the 2022, 2025, and 2030, you can find them all in my SoFi price targets video. I'll go through all of my explanation for why in that video. Those are all based on the business and the vision and the team that's there at SoFi. Now, those targets are dependent upon SoFi's ability or inability to execute on realizing the vision that they've set out for themselves and the business goals and practices and metrics that they report, such as earnings that are coming up. And that's what those longer term price targets are going to be achieved or not achieved because of, in my opinion. Now, these day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month fluctuations that we're seeing at the moment, there's a lot of other factors that aren't necessarily having anything to do with them achieving their vision or their goals or the actual sort of value of their business. These have a lot to do with some uncertainty around SoFi, I think still the stank of the SPAC that's on it, that people have really grown begrudging toward SPACs, and also the lockup period or lockup periods and the selling pressure that that's bringing, and or just the fear and uncertainty that that's infusing into SoFi and then causing investors to kind of pull out or stay away at the moment because they're kind of unsure what's going on and everything is so confusing. So I'm just saying that because I know that short term this feels like a lot of pain to endure, and it is. I wouldn't say that it's not, but that's my perspective in it. And you can go back and look at another video I did called like SoFi Dip Real Talk or something like that. And in that video, I kind of talk about how I try to frame my thinking around these sell-offs versus why I'm interested in the company, why I think it has a bright future, and how I sort of try to quarantine these different categories of thoughts within my mind so I don't just end up freaking out and doing anything out of panic. All right, so today let's walk through it and I'll kind of make my case for why I thought this was actually a solid day. Now, we'll go through this again in a little bit, briefly. I'm not going to go through a full lockup thing, but to the best of my current understanding, there was an unlock that happened today, meaning all the requirements were satisfied at the end of close yesterday. Unlock came to pass today for the 83% in aggregate of those shares that were held by some portion of around 74-75% of all of the available shares. Now, I didn't think for a moment that the price having done what it has done, meaning mostly just sell off in recent past, like while those folks were locked up, I didn't think for a moment that there would be a ton of those people dumping a ton of those shares into the market. That said, it was such a relatively high amount by percent of the shares that, even a smaller percentage would, could be a pretty hefty amounts and be a lot of sell power or sell volume for the stock to hold up during. But what we saw today was basically on day one, more of what I would have expected, which is a pretty regular volume. Now, yes, this is over the 3-month average, which you have to remember back when the first lockup period expired, we saw volumes in the 30s, 40s, 50s of millions, whereas today we saw about a third of that volume come through. So to me, that's good. That to me doesn't scream that, hey, these people all of a sudden can sell their shares, and so they are doing so en masse. I think there's some folks that are. I think that there's some folks that are selling a portion just because they worked hard for these shares that they were granted in many cases, and they want to reap some benefit or some reward for that. Like I've said in previous videos, I've been an early member of a startup company that then went public like 7 years later or something like that. And it's a long time, and it's a lot of risk that you take. And, in certain situations, you take a lesser salary to take more stock options granted to you. And then you put in all this time working and vesting those options as you go along. And, and there's a very small percentage of companies that are able to make that happen, to actually go public. So the fact that some folks want to take some of that profit now, even though the stock price is very low, is just a sort of, to me, it's just a testament to what they did in order to earn those, and then wanting to realize some of that relatively soon. Some folks can take some time off, for example, by cashing in on all or a portion of what they have. Now, the flip side of that, to me, and what I think is actually happening here, because the volume is where it is because the price has gotten beaten down so much, I tend to believe that folks who don't have that kind of impulse, like I just described, like I want to cash this in, I want to take a year off, or I want to go take my family to do X, Y, or Z, or I want to buy a house, whatever it is, if they're not thinking about cashing in to do something like that, I think the flip side of that coin is they're thinking about, well, this price has been so deflated, and I don't think that the company's value is accurately reflected in slightly less than a $12 billion market cap. And I think that there's a ton of upside here. And so I'm going to hold on to these for the time being, basically keep an eye on what's happening in the next few weeks or months and make some decisions. But I think that there's a lot of upside here. Obviously, as we've seen, analysts at this point are converging around like almost a 2x consensus price target. And so if folks are thinking, well, if I can hold on to this and we have good earnings coming up, and then our bank charter comes through, maybe what I have right now will actually be worth double by end of year or within a year or something like that. And so to me, that's probably going to hold off a lot of folks, as actually they would be resistant to sell because the stock price has been beaten down so much in the lead up to this most recent unlock. That's my 2 cents, and I don't know particularly how anyone's feeling, but that is just what I would say from having gone through it and sort of knowing how myself and my former colleagues thought about a lot of these things when it happened to us. Now, pulled back here on the daily, let's go through the charts, then we'll go through the indicators, and I'll do a macro chart we're looking at here on the daily, and then we'll zoom in to the 5 minutes and to the 1 minute to kind of unpack how I interpreted what happened today. And of course, then we'll look at the indicators, and then we'll flip over and take a quick look at some data and call it a video. But the price dropping down here today and coming into this purple box, which I had drawn back on, I guess, the 14th of July, and it's sitting just above this 1465 demand zone that I also had plotted. That tracks back all the way to 513 when we saw that initial run up. This is where we had a great moment in the IPOE videos, was when we were starting to call out the likelihood for hype converging with the short squeeze that could occur. And then we saw this phenomenal run up. Those were the times when everyone was happy. And we saw this phenomenal run up in a short period of time from 1414 to 2495. And that was just over the course of a couple of weeks. So it happened very, very fast. And then this has also felt very fast, generally speaking, but has also in many ways felt like we've been slowly bled out from those highs. But that price draws back to that zone. It bounced twice off of that zone, and then it rocketed up. And yes, like I said, a lot of this was based on hype, was based on short squeeze, or some fraction or portion of a short squeeze. But there's still strong demand there from what I can tell from the previous price action. So I would still anticipate if it does dip down to that 1465 zone, that there should be a lot of demand pressure there. Now, if it slips, you see this 1618 retracement level is at 1397. So that could provide some additional support. And then I have another zone down here, another demand zone at 1311. Now I'm hoping very much that we don't need those zones, just because it's fine to scoop up shares in a company that you think has really great long-term potential for cheap. That's great, but to a certain extent. On the other hand, you also want to say, okay, while there are some eyes and there's some interest in SoFi, I want folks to start getting involved in this and getting invested, and that would come in the form of buying volume. Right? That buying pressure would come in to scoop up shares, and folks would be taking positions and building investment strategies around having this in their portfolio and that sort of thing. And so to me, that's why I don't want to see it dip too low, even though long term it does sound good if, again, the company and the team can execute on the vision and the prospects that they have. So this is where we're looking in the long term. Now, while we're here on the daily, I think that it's worth taking a look at the MACD. The MACD is continuing, and I know this is weird because we just had another big negative day, coming down almost 4% today. But look at, pull back. Sometimes you just got to pull back and take a bigger look. Unless you're trading weekly call options or something, you can pull back a little bit and you can kind of take the broader picture and sort of get a better sense of where you are. Where we are is we have had this incredibly painful sell-off like we've been talking about. But even though we've continued to sell off ever since, when did this start to curl down? Say probably around July 9th, July 12th, somewhere around there. Even coming down from there, which at that point we closed at 1645. So almost $2 per share more. The selling pressure, or the bearish momentum represented on this histogram, has continued to dwindle and dwindle and dwindle. And at this point, we are as poised as we would ever be for a bullish crossover on the MACD, which the advantage to this is this could give us longer term bullish potential. When you see the MACD crossover on the 5-minute or on the 1-minute or something, that to me is if I'm trading intraday, or at the most that I'm holding something overnight, but even then I'm probably not looking at the 1 or the 5-minute, to be honest. That to me is intraday perspective. This to me is my investment perspective. This is I'm holding this for several months perspective or years perspective. And the good news, to me, it looks like we may have found ourselves a floor. And nice that it happens to be in this purple bounce zone that we had put in a little while back. Nice that it happens to be just a bit above this bounce zone that we had put in here, right? And so these are all good signs. We do need it to happen. We do need that bullish crossover to actually occur. And it could absolutely come down here and flatten out and just stay flat for a while and not really cross over, but just kind of weave in and out over and under each other, the MACD and the signal line. It could also stabilize, flatten out a little bit, and then draw down more. It could definitely do that. I don't know. But what I'm saying is it's as poised as it has been since this sell-off for a bullish crossover. So I'm most interested to see what's going to happen. And on the RSI side of things, nothing that interesting to look at here except for to prepare for when this approaches the midline, which is where my cursor is right now. The 50 mark on the RSI is I want to see it rocket through that level, showing that the buying pressure and the volume and the strength is there. But I would even take some stabilizing around the 50 mark and then establishing over it, much like you would on a candlestick chart, looking for support over that 50 RSI level and then making a run into overbought. But to me, that's not indicating anything right now. Right now, to me, the MACD is indicating, or it has the potential to indicate. Now, on the volume side of things, this is what we're talking about. See, the volume had come down, and right now it's just sort of hitting its head on this blue line here with the most recent average. Now we see when the last unlock happened, we're talking about 56 million, 55 million. This is in a day. 27 million, 19 million, 25 million. Versus today, not even 16.5 million. Okay, so a little uptick in volume from what we saw as the trading week finished up last week, but there were higher volume days midweek last week than we saw today. So to me, this doesn't scream folks were clamoring to jump in and sell ASAP, which would have been today, from what I can glean from the info that we've covered. Now, let's zoom it in to the 5-day, 5 minutes, take a closer look at where we stand. Now, here we are fixed in the purple buy zone. There is also this sort of prevailing down trend line that we can pretty easily see here, where all of these match up really tightly. And we'll put it here. We can extend it out again tomorrow if we need to. Hopefully we don't. But basically we see today was the point at which this downtrend line would have did intersect with this 1465 bounce zone, or demand zone, I should say. And the price, while it continued to follow it down there relatively closely, didn't need to fully test that level, bounced a little bit sooner. And not only that, but if we zoom in on the daily, this is why I found today to be not that horrifying, was for the overall volume reasons that I had explained before, and that it's bouncing, or seems to be bouncing, in this bounce zone that we have. It's bouncing in expected areas. In other words, if there was actually a huge sell-off occurring because an unlock had happened, I would expect a bunch of unexpected things to happen. Just meaning that I wouldn't expect it to still be continuing to follow trends that we've identified in the trading pattern that would be kind of unresolvable in a market situation where the price is being, I don't know about 100%, but 80 or 90% dictated by a large share unlock that is then being thrust into the open market. Now, if we look at the volume here today, this is the other thing that made me feel kind of okay. There's some solid buy volume actually that came in. Now, yes, the sell volume is certainly where the peaks occur by a long shot, but we do see several areas of green peeking out over that blue line also throughout the day, and especially in toward the close here. So this does say to me that there were certainly some folks who, like I said, could and should, and they should do what they want with those shares that they earned, and they were wanting to put those out and sell them into the marketplace. But we did see at various levels, and especially within this purple box, a lot of willingness to buy, and buy in pretty solid quantities, even in the face of the pressure that was seen. So this could be the Jim Cramer effect. I don't know. If you saw last week, we were kind of laughing in the video about Jim Cramer talking about if the price got down another $1 that he'd be interested, and I was kind of laughing about that. But I guess the $14 range is the Jim Cramer buy zone, so that's could be our magic money-making target. Thanks, Jim Cramer. Let's take a look at the 5-day indicators just to see what might kind of evolve this week based on where we are. So MACD is sitting right on the baseline at the moment. Essentially, the bullish momentum that we saw that kept the price up and off of 1465 earlier in the day, it's died down. That said, aside from the immense sell-off at the beginning of the day, which again, to me, that's likely the folks who really wanted to get their sell orders out there, and you saw a bunch more come in this time frame. And obviously, that's what that is, and that's fine. But even through this large sell volume that we saw here around the 11:30, 11:45 time frame, the MACD crossed over and started some bullish momentum up. And so to me, that's a really good sign that the buy volume that we saw, although it's well outpaced by the sell volume here, was enough to come in and counteract any additional bearish momentum that this volume would have contributed to increasing. So it was able to stall it out still and then even reverse the trend at that moment, stabilize it out, and then reverse it. So to me, these were all really good signs of how it stood up in some initial selling pressure, some initial sort of like intersection of selling pressure. I don't know what I'm sort of trying to say here. It's kind of like its first battle with the selling pressure with this most recent lockup. And to me, it reacted really, really solidly, and I was pretty happy with that. Kind of weird to say that on a day where we're down so much, but these are the reasons why I'm thinking that. Now let's flip over here. Ortex, we see there's also a few other things that are coming out. I think it was yesterday's video or the day before we had looked at a Motley Fool article that was pretty, I don't want to say praising of SoFi, but it was pretty positive on SoFi. And then this one came out today. This is from, I don't know what this is, Money Morning, I guess is the name of the publication. But this, to me, read as though it's a pretty positive article. And so I think the extent to which those continue to come out will be solid. And then obviously we have the 2750 consensus price target with 3 buy ratings. And that gives us, over 75% potential upside in the near term. And if that continues to be the case, then that would be great. Shorts continuing to generally stay out of SoFi. Ortex estimating basically 2.75% of the free float with short interest today. So I tweeted out while we were driving today. I was not driving and tweeting. I was in the passenger seat and had just mentioned that it was coming into the purple bounce zone at that point, and I was going to be looking for it to hopefully bounce. And we saw it sort of collect itself in that box the entire rest of the day. And I sort of say this here as well with the low volume, not concerning to me at the moment. And I thought that we were in a good potential bounce zone from this purple area, which was just the price where it is now. I think it's at a good potential bounce zone down to 1455, which at that moment was the 1465 minus the ATR on the ATR indicator. I do want to mention 2 things. Well, this I was just going to look at the volume, but we've already done that, so we can skip that. The last thing is I got this email from somebody who says that they were an ex-SoFi employee, and they wanted to share the specifications that they have in terms of the lockup period. Now, these track really closely with some of the requirements that were with the company that I was a part of, and what they had sent out when they were IPOing. Now, there's certainly, I would think, some difference there because that was a traditional IPO. This is obviously IPOing via SPAC. But this person made 3 points. They said all current and past employees or investors were locked up until June 27th, 30 days after the deal closed. For past employees, after June 27th, they could sell. But for current employees, that date full into the next quarter, I'm not quite sure what that typo is there, but so they can't sell until 2 trading days after the release of the Q2 earnings report. Now that tracks exactly the same as specifications that I received as it pertained to my company. And so that earnings report makes a lot of sense to me. And so there will be an additional lockup that ends after the earnings that come out in August. Now, they're probably copying, pasting portions of this or remembering portions of this from the email that they received. And at that time, whoever was sending that out from SoFi, probably their legal or compliance teams, were targeting around August 18th because they didn't know exactly what the date would be. And so that's why that's going to be slightly off. And then he or she just mentions that directors and officers have the long 180-day lockup period with the release rules as you've discussed in some of your videos. So to that, I think that they are alluding to the 20 trading days within 30 trading day with the price thresholds that we've discussed. So some additional info here. So if this kind of tracks, this unlocks a little bit more info from what we have from investor relations, but if we kind of blend these things together, it's sort of like all of these things were true along the way. Yes, the lockup ended on June 27th, but it was still a restriction for the directors, officers, large shareholders, and in current employees. So as of today, it appears that 83% of the shares that were held by certain insiders plus sponsors were unlocked. The PIPE investors, we believe, were always able to sell around 15% of all of the shares. And then we would still now be waiting on the amount that's locked up until 2 trading days after the release of the Q2 earnings report. So this makes a ton of sense to me. Again, I can't 100% vouch for this person. I don't know them, but this is what they sent. And like I said, to the extent to which this tracks really closely with the instructions that I was sent, that's where it seems to have a pretty solid ring of truth in my experience. But take that for what you will and do with it what you want. But that will do it for this video. I'm really interested to see what happens this week and if that volume picks up significantly or not. To me, that'll be obviously the telling point is if the volume suddenly spikes and we're back into the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. I mean, maybe not even 30s, but 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80 million, something around there would be like, whoa, this is a lot that's happening. And I would anticipate at that time that would be sell volume based off of the most recent lockup that it ended. That said, keep in mind, as I mentioned in the video, the price has been beaten down so far that it's likely to have a little bit of a counter effect where folks are thinking this is a temporary crazy beatdown, it's an overreaction in the markets, and we know what the company has in store. We know some of the things that will be coming up in the near future, and I'm at least going to wait to see what happens to those before the end of the year and make my decisions based on that. So a lot of factors here, which, like I said, I think in yesterday's video, that's why IPOE and now SoFi was always interesting to me just from a stock perspective. There's so many different forces at play and counter forces at play. To see how you can try to identify them and speculate what's going to happen versus then what actually happens is a really good learning experience, I think. And to me, that's why I wanted to track it so closely. One of the reasons why I wanted to track it so closely. All right. Well, I hope your trading week is going well. I'm really excited to be back home, and I'm looking forward to a great week of videos. And I always appreciate you watching and sharing and liking and subscribing. So thanks a bunch for that. I will see you in the next video.